As you know, if you listen to this podcast, I am a big believer in knowing what you want from any given political situation, because they purposely use emotionalism and crisis to get you confused about how you want to solve problems. And I think you have to know what you want so you know how to get there, obviously, right? When you say, oh, there's children being separated at the border, my question is, all right, what do you want? Open borders, or you want legal borders? Or you want a wall? What do you want? And that's how we're going to solve this problem, instead of getting swept away. So with the press, I think it's really important to say this, because the New York Times, I'll talk about this in a minute, but the New York Times and Donald Trump got in a little feud over the weekend. The editor of the New York Times, Blithering Prevarication III, as we call him here, got in a feud with Donald Trump. And I was thinking to myself, well, what do I want from the press? Because I am a First Amendment purist. I believe you should be able to say anything you want. Yes, you can't cry fire in a crowded theater, and you can't threaten me with death or something like that. But other than that, you should be able to express any opinion you want. And even things that I find reprehensible, like burning the flag, I believe should be protected as speech, because it is a protest that you are making. I think it's disgusting. I think you should turn your back on anyone who does it. I think you should be rejected socially, but I think it should be legal. I just think that is essential to owning yourself, to being a free person. So I don't want anything to happen to the press by the government. I think the press should reform itself. And in fact, there's some small naive part of me that cannot understand why the press won't do this. What I want is an American press, because in Europe, the press is the way our press has become. And in Europe, for instance, when I lived in England, there were 3 major papers. There were a lot of papers. That was the best thing about it. I love newspapers, and there were a lot of papers. But if you were a liberal, you read The Guardian. If you wanted to know what liberals were thinking, you read The Guardian. If you were in the middle, you read The Independent. And then if you were a conservative, you read The Telegraph. And I just noticed over time, that was kind of when I was going through this transition after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I noticed over time that I just started picking up The Telegraph, that The Telegraph made more sense to me. I was reading the conservative paper, but you knew what you were getting. So you knew, like, well, wait, if something wasn't right in the Telegraph, you went to the Guardian to get the left-wing point of view. And that's the way our press has become. But in the 50s, back when we had a consensus, when there was kind of a general idea of what Americans were and what we wanted, and we were really fighting over the 50-yard line all the time. The conservatives were on the right of the 50-yard line, the leftists were on the left of the 50-yard line. When we were doing that, the press began to develop the idea that the American press should be objective, that we should get both sides of the story from every good paper. And that's why you have a New York Times that said all the news that's fit to print, right? Well, now we still have that slogan. The problem is, in Europe, you have, yes, we are the left-wing paper. We are the socialist paper. The Guardian is the socialist paper. That's what you're coming here for. But now what we have is we still have the vestige of that American system, all the news that's fit to print, on the masthead of a newspaper that's a leftist rag. If the New York Times said, power to the people, if their masthead said power to the people, workers of the world unite, then it wouldn't bother me to pick up the New York Times and hear that during the Soviet Union, women had better sex. Then I would think, it's the Soviet paper. That's what it has. But when it says all the news that's fit to print, it is a lie. And what I would like to see the papers and the news channels that pretend to be objective or even think they're objective, because I actually think Brian Stelter thinks that CNN is objective. I would like to see them become objective. How do they reform? Simple. I wrote this for the LA Times. I think it must be 15 years ago. I wrote an op-ed said, hire some conservatives. You want to save the news business? Hire some conservatives. What does it take to put people in the position to regulate the news, editors who have the say over what goes on? What would it take to just put a few in there who maybe voted for Donald Trump? After all, a lot of people voted for Donald Trump and a lot of people like him. What would it take to do that? It would reform the news system entirely, because every time somebody sat down to write Donald Trump lied today, there would be somebody sitting next to him to say, well, wait a minute, that may just be a negotiation ploy. Maybe calling it a lie is a little bit biased. Maybe you're not really living in The Handmaid's Tale just because some people think that an unborn baby has a right to life. Maybe that doesn't make this The Handmaid's Tale. Maybe it just means there's debate going on, even though the Supreme Court essentially took our power of debate away. So that is what I'm looking for when I see these people go. And